The New and Old Homelessness by Jacob Rapelier. My thesis is that homelessness, in the way that people think about it, normally is a societal problem that needs to be dealt with through increased understanding and support from our laws and from society. The type of homelessness, the other type of new voluntary homelessness, is a lifestyle choice that can give you location and financial independence, and sometimes it might cost you some personal comforts or a little bit of discomfort living, but the reward is that kind of freedom. The two types of homelessness should be distinguishable from each other as different ways of living, and in both cases, the common stigma of homelessness should be removed or educated away. Okay, next slide. Here we have two pictures. We got what the normal version of homelessness might look like: a lady living on the streets, eating a yogurt maybe, and then we have the new homelessness, which is shown here, and that's a sort of example of what your house might look like. That's a little backpack. Sitting on a bench with some food some lady gave me on a bus. Okay, switch slides. Oh, whoops. Switch slides. So the old homelessness might be caused by something like all these drugs you see in that picture, or layoffs or injury. A lot of times if you get injured and you don't have good insurance, you're just basically out of luck, and you might have gigantic medical costs that could very well put you homeless. Next slide. So we don't really know how to deal with the old type of homelessness yet. We've tried a lot of things. We have low-income housing. We have temporary overnight shelters, but there's a lot of problems with those. There isn't nearly enough housing as there are homeless people. And even the housing that we do have is often really uncomfortable and not a pleasant place to be, and many people would rather just stay out in the streets than stay in the cruddy housing. Next slide. So, a little bit of the stigma that homeless people might face comes from a lot of the American societal values that consider productivity and self-reliance to be the most important things, and homeless people are often seen as the antithesis of these values of productivity and self-reliance. But I'd like to argue that perhaps homeless people are not less unproductive than, say, other aspects of society that might not have a stigma, such as fast food workers or even people high up, such as bank executives. You gotta wonder, we have all these people working in these factories or in these organizations, and are they really doing society any more good than the homeless people might be doing? I think we should think a little bit more about that, so as not to judge before we can really decide what kind of an impact each class of people has in society. Next slide. Continuing on with the stigma, there's a lot of laws being passed that are making it harder and harder for homeless people to live as homeless. And this is an issue because a lot of the involuntarily homeless don't have another option, and their lives are already hard, and these are just making it harder. I know when I've been sleeping in my car a few times, I've been kicked out by officers or kicked out of parks, and it's just not something you need in that situation. It just makes everything harder. And not only that, but it takes up valuable resources in the justice system. Next slide. So especially the criminalization of sleep is a really nasty thing, because when you're in that sort of situation, it's not like you can just go out and buy yourself a house. You have to sleep. If you've been 20 hours, 15 hours without sleeping, you're going to feel sleepy, and if you don't have a place to sleep, you're going to sleep on the sidewalk or in your car or whatever you have. And for them to criminalize that, for them to be able to give you tickets or even put you in jail, there have been cases of people going in jail for sleeping in their cars. It's absurd, and it costs the taxpayers a lot of money on top of that, on top of it being a violation of human rights. So on to the new type of homelessness, which is, well, living homelessly or homefully voluntarily, and a lot of it's all about achieving independence. And so there's usually two ways to achieve financial independence, and that's by either raising your income or cutting your costs. And it's not easy to double or triple your income. But it is quite simple to halve your costs or even cut your costs in thirds, as simple as living in your truck as shown in this picture. And so if you can do that, you're essentially giving yourself a big boost as far as financial independence. Next slide. The benefits, the most important benefits, I think, are your freedom of all your time and where you are. That's really the most important thing. Next slide, and I'll explain. So for the large majority of Americans who have a 40-hour work week, they're doing this sort of 40-hour work week for their large majority of their adult lives, and that's such a huge, massive chunk of time of their lives. And I think the question to ask for that is, would you do your work for free? Because what that's going to tell you is, do you really like your work enough that you'd do it even if you weren't being compensated with money? And if your answer to that question is no, it means that you can think of something else you'd rather be doing with that time. So maybe if you're one of the lucky few ones who works in his passion and that's the thing you most want to be doing in the world is your work, that's great, but that's not the case for the large majority of people. So the real benefit of voluntary homelessness, I think, is that it frees up your time. You can use all your time to do whatever you want, whether that be traveling the world or solving world hunger, doing charity work, writing a novel, spending time with your family, whatever you want. And that's what I think the most important part about voluntary homelessness is. Next slide. So now you're wondering what are the methods for doing this? And really it's a wide open field. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You can live in a car pretty easily. You can do it out of your backpack. You could rent out a roof. You could rent out a garage. You could dig a hole underground. You could live in a tree, or you could go overseas and even rent a house because the prices are so cheap. You could build a yurt in the woods or sleep in an abandoned lot at the edge of town. All these really are feasible and probably easier than you think. I've lived out of my car and out of my backpack and in the woods, and it was pleasant. Honestly, it wasn't even that uncomfortable. I had a beautiful meadow out in the woods that I'd go home to every night after work, and I'd hang up my hammock. And so there's really a lot of different ways you can do this. Admittedly, there is going to be some extra discomfort if you like your big fluffy bed and your Netflix. It's going to be a little bit harder to get those sorts of needs, but you can do things like join a gym to get your showers, or soak in the hot tub, or have extra places to store your stuff, or rent out like a rental space to store stuff, or even sleep in if you wanted to. Wouldn't be a bad idea. The great thing about this lifestyle is it's so flexible. You can do it wherever you want. If where you are is too cold to be sleeping outside, you can go 1,000 miles south, no problem. If you don't like sleeping in the woods, you can go down to Mexico and rent out a house for $50 a month. There's really a lot of options and a lot of flexibility in this type of life. Next slide. So one of the best benefits of voluntary homelessness is that you have freedom of location, and that means you can take advantage of the amazing exchange rate we have here in America. So we can go down to Mexico, where the average earnings are about $10, $12 a day. And so if you have $4,000, $5,000 saved up, which if you're living homelessly would only take very little time to save up because your costs are so low, you could go live there quite luxuriously in a nice place, eating out all the time, buying whatever you want for a year, no problem. And you can even go to other places that would be even cheaper. You could probably survive on $4,000, $5,000 in some places in Southeast Asia for 2 or 3 years if you're going to live very, very cheaply. But if you want to live somewhat luxuriously with a nice little hut on the beach, you could live for quite a while. Next slide. So if you're going to do this, you got to know what you're going to pack, what kind of things you're going to bring. A big part of this lifestyle is minimalism. You cannot have a lot of things because, one, you have no place to put them, and if you have things, you have to carry them all with you. So the less you have, the better. To the right, you'll see the picture of what I packed on a 6-month camping trip, and you can see it's not a lot of stuff. It just fits in one backpack. It's pretty light. You got the rope, sleeping bag, a little hammock with a tent thing, couple pairs of clothes, a water bottle, and a camp stove, and that's really all you need. A few other knickknacks, knife, compass, but you really do not need a lot to live this way, and it's comfortable. You don't want a lot. Your basic needs are satisfied. Next slide. So, you may be thinking this is just for the young and adventurous, and you wouldn't be able to do it with a family. And although it certainly is more difficult for a family, first of all, your wife or husband would have to agree to it, but despite this extra difficulty, it is definitely possible. I've met people families living in RVs, or families who've been living abroad using the exchange rate and not working. So, although it is more difficult, really anybody can do it, including seniors, family men, whoever. Next slide. So this is the conclusion, just a restatement of the thesis, is that typical homelessness is a societal problem that is really exacerbated by misunderstandings and social stigma. But that new homelessness is a respectable lifestyle that can give one financial and personal freedom at the cost of some comforts. New homelessness is not for everyone, but it should be commonly known. It should be recognized for an option. It should be in your array of choices for how you want to live. And it's a really good way to escape from wage slavery and achieve your goals that you normally wouldn't have the time or money for otherwise. And that concludes my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed and think a little bit differently about living without a house right now. Thank you. Bye.